fine, thank you.
Great.
And just a reminder that the meeting's recorded and I've started the recording.
Put on your game face. Public comment. I don't see.
I have a public
Anyone?
comment. I'd be interested to ask, as a public member, what's the status of officers getting inoculated? Are they, I mean, I'm sure you're on a priority list.
We just got notified last week that all fire and law enforcement officers were moved up based on an emergency order by the state, and we are in the process of scheduling vaccinations for the staff that had agreed to get vaccinated this week. So hopefully all fire and law enforcement in Dane County will be vaccinated this week.
Can I ask, or is it, maybe it's not, maybe it's private information, but what % of the staff are interested in getting vaccinated or not?
Yeah, I'm told that is we're getting in some of those gray areas.
Okay.
So I probably can't answer that one, but I think overall, I think what I'm hearing and what I'm reading is about 20 to 25% of staff members throughout the state are declining the vaccination, but I think overall in Middleton, it's much better than that.
Okay. There's like a rating, right? Like this week, they're doing shots for people who work with patients, I guess, and then I guess there's a bunch of categories. So are you like second on the list, or?
1A was the
1B.
1A was the first group, and that was all healthcare workers. I think it was those in corrections, I think prisoners and medical facilities, stuff like that. They were all 1A. Law enforcement and firefighters were 1B. And that's actually 1B is a pretty large group. I think teachers fall into that group.
Yeah, I think teachers are in there too. Yeah.
Yeah, public works folks. And then there was the paramedics and many others were kind of advocating for law enforcement and firefighters to get moved up because of calls for service. So a paramedic unit will be rolling to an EMS call, but actually police and fire will show up first. We're usually the first ones given CPR and providing first aid. So paramedics and many others were advocating for fire and police to get moved up. So they created a special category about a week and a half ago of 1AA, and that's where they are right now. And Dane County told us last week that they're hoping to finish 1AA this week, and then they're moving on to 1B. So I think teachers and all those others that are in that 1B category will start being offered the vaccinations within a week or two.
Yes, I'm a volunteer for the Red Cross, and I think I'm in a gray area between 1A and 1B. I got the invite to do it this week, but I read the requirements, and it seemed like I clearly wasn't entitled, based on just making deliveries of blood to a hospital. I don't think that would be appropriate for me to be on a priority list, because I'm not really exposed to the patients directly. But, you have to read all the fine print. I would have been embarrassed if I would have read that fine print after getting the shot.
All right, any other public comment before we move on? I don't see anyone else on the call. I think everyone else is here. Okay. Approval of minutes. Did everyone have a chance to review the minutes? Are there any corrections?
I reviewed them real, briefly. I didn't like scrutinize them tight, but they looked okay. But I was just, and I think I might have, sometimes I've mentioned that the convention, I don't think I mentioned this particular concern, but is it conventional to be inserting the other materials like the letter that we were addressing? I was wondering, could something like that be, I mean, this is nitpicking, but could something like that be put on as an attachment so the minutes are separate from a letter?
Instead of in line in the text, is that what you mean, Tom?
Right, yeah, so that's totally separate, and the minutes would be shorter and briefer and a little bit easier to review, and then you could go to the attachment if you wanted to see that extra detail.
I'm not aware of that ever being done, and that email and that letter was included based on the requests of the members of this group. So I'm not aware of any other attachments to meeting minutes. Meeting minutes are just like what you're seeing here, and that they're all they're all one document, unless somebody in this group has seen something different in the past.
Well, I would think, you know, to attach it or to put it at the end where it would look like an attachment. I mean, if it was inserted at the end of the minutes, then it would look like an attachment, which, because it, you know, I guess minutes, I think aren't, I think they're supposed to be briefer. I don't know.
We could attach it as an addendum.
It's just however you do it. It's, you know, if we had a bunch of letters, we could do it attachments, but we've had, this is my 4th or 5th meeting, we've had one public comment, and the guy asked, you know, he had a thorough thing, and we said we wanted it in the minutes because it was a pretty interesting discussion. So I'd like to just leave it as it is.
Okay.
I think, Tom, to your point, for future meetings, if we have more, we could revisit. But
Okay, that'd be nice.
okay. Any other comments on minutes?
Motion to accept the minutes.
Great, thank you.
Second.
Great.
Third.
Okay. All right, with that, first agenda item, Chief Hillenbrand, summary of department complaints within the past quarter.
All right, can everybody see the screen that I have up
Yes.
that I'm sharing? So we'll go, like we did with the last meeting, we'll go through the citizen complaints in the last quarter. I think last quarter that we, or the last meeting, we had 4 of them. We ended up with 5. We'll go through them. One of them is pretty lengthy, kind of give you a little background of the incident itself. And you can see like on the screen, the type of complaints, the incident date, and the complaint, if the complaint form was returned by the complainants or not. You know, when you think about the number of calls, again, thousands of contacts that we had with citizens throughout the last quarter, and we ended up with 5 complaints. And you'll see, like with some of the other complaints that we briefed you on last meeting, that some of them are, I think, if you look at the complaint itself is interesting, and what they're complaining about. We thoroughly investigate every single complaint, whether it's a formal or an informal complaint. And we take pride on that, where a lot of departments don't do that. They have to get the form returned before they launch a complaint, where we don't. If the individual indicates to us that they want to file any type of complaint, we look into it, and it gets assigned to a supervisor, whether it's a lieutenant or our operations captain, to take a look at the complaints. So the first one is got a complaint to us on the 31st of October. So this was a report of a reckless vehicle entering our city. The vehicle was actually seen passing other vehicles on the right side of the road and in the shoulder. A Middleton sergeant actually observed it enter our city, made a traffic stop. The car actually pulled into like a apartment complex and then came back out onto the roadway of Century Avenue. While the officers were investigating this traffic complaint, what turned out to be a teenage driver who admitted to smoking marijuana and also who did not have a driver's license. The mother of the 2 passengers, they were actually siblings, arrived on scene. And reading the reports, I'm pleased that our officers didn't arrest her based on her behavior. So she tried to interfere. She tried to tell the officer. She got real close to the sergeant who was talking to her 2 children, and was trying to interfere, tell him that they needed to stop this investigation. At one point, she actually pushed his flashlight away because it was dark out, and she thought that he shouldn't be shining the flashlight. She was trying to stand between him and the vehicle, again, trying to influence the traffic stop, which we're legally justified to make that traffic stop. And the officer directed her to the sidewalk where she could still listen, but not intervene, and tried to influence the traffic stop. So she later filed a complaint, and you can see she listed, I believe there's 7 of them, actually 8 of them. We'll kind of go through them quickly. She filed 8 different kind of complaints. She thought that removal of the driver, again, she was not the parent of the driver, but she thought the removal of the driver from the vehicle was kind of dangerous. Well, we removed the drivers because we conduct field sobriety testing, and this driver admitted again that they were under the influence of marijuana. They admitted to that. So there's no justification that we endangered them. There's plenty of police officers there. That's the last thing we want, is to endanger anybody that we pull over. We place them in a specific spot in the traffic stop so that we can conduct an investigation, but again, not endanger them at all. So there was no basis for that complaint. Officer questioned minors without the parent. That's the second claim she had. During the initial phase of the traffic stop, the police are not required to notify parents before proceeding, nor is this practical. I mean, sometimes we could be waiting for hours. We've actually had parents in the past tell us we're not showing up, or hold on to the kid for hours. We don't have the time to do that. As I like to tell others, we have on average 3 patrol officers and a supervisor working. In a case like this, there's at least 2, probably 3 officers tied up on this traffic stop. So we might have 1 officer still available for calls. So we can't wait for parents to show up, and nor is there any requirement by law that we got to notify parents before proceeding with a traffic type investigation or any investigation whatsoever. The third complaint was officers performed field sobriety testing without a parent or attorney present. Again, during an active investigation, in this case, operating while under the influence investigation. We're not required to notify parents before proceeding, nor is this practical. Again, that we could be waiting hours for a parent to show
Troy,
up.
did he admit to using marijuana before the test or after?
When he was stopped, he actually admitted to smoking
Okay.
marijuana while in the car.
Okay.
And they did find marijuana and drug paraphernalia in the car during the traffic stop.
Okay.
Actually, the passengers handed that out to the officers.
Okay.
The fourth complaint was officers attempted to deny the children's right to parents' presence. Again, it's not something we have to do. The mother showed up during the traffic stop of the 2 passengers. Again, she tried to interfere. She tried to block the supervisor's flashlight, told the kids not to talk to the officers. The officers didn't ask them anything incriminating. The only thing they asked was for their identification. But because mom was there and was kind of being belligerent, the officers didn't go any further with asking the passengers any other information. She was never told to leave. She was just told to stand on the sidewalk so she could listen, but not, again, interfere in the investigation. Number 6 complaint she made was officers physically restrained the parent and used unnecessary excessive force. Body-worn camera was viewed. The officers never touched her, never restrained her. The only thing they did was to hold their hand up to tell her to stand on the sidewalk, and again, not to interfere. And again, based on what the report that I read, I think by her hitting the officer's flashlight and interfering, she probably could have been arrested for obstructing or disorderly conduct. The officers were very patient, didn't do that. They know that wasn't going to go in a positive direction if they then arrested her based on her behavior. So the only thing they told her was, again, to stand on the sidewalk so they can complete the investigation. Number 7, the complainant indicated officers refused to release the children. The officers never refused to release the children, nor did the parent make such a request. And the parent, in fact, told the kids to sit tight and wait in the car. And once the investigation was concluded, everybody was released. There were some citations that were issued, but the juvenile was not arrested for operating while under the influence after performing the field sobriety test. And then number 8, the complaint was this, she had requested that a superior officer show up because she didn't like the sergeant and wanted to speak with somebody who was ranked higher than him. There was no other superior officer working. There was no lieutenants, captains, or anybody else working. This was 9 o'clock at night. The sergeant told her that. She was not happy with that. So she still made a complaint that she wanted to speak with somebody else and demanded that like a captain or a lieutenant get called in to deal with this situation, which is not our normal practice or procedure in these type of situations. So this was thoroughly investigated by lieutenants. There was nothing that we found out of policy, and the complaint was listed as unfounded.
Troy, did you see the questions in the chat? I think there was some questions on if there's no license, how do you find the driver was a minor, and what's the procedure for calling parents when you interact with juveniles?
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. I can't see the chat when I'm sharing my screen.
Sure. Yeah.
So the question is, how did we find out? So they had already.
So with no license, how do you know they were a minor?
Yeah, like prior to the stop or during the stop? Do you know who asked?
I think during this, Bartlett.
Okay. So this individual already had been stopped previously for another violation. So they were already on file for having a driver's license that was suspended. So that's something that we can easily find in our database on our mobile data terminals. And what was the other question?
The other question, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
The next question was, what is the procedure for calling parents when you do interact with juveniles?
Yep, we try to get all the parents as soon as we can. But during the active part of the investigation, there's no expectation. But as soon as there's like a downtime where we feel like that it's appropriate to get a hold of parents, we do. In most cases, in this case, probably as soon as, well, in this case, the officers, as soon as they got done with the field sobriety test, they tried getting hold of the driver's mom and couldn't get a hold of her. So they actually ended up releasing the driver to the mother who showed up, again, the mother of the passengers. So we try to do it pretty quickly, but again, there's no obligation that we need to do it during an active investigation. But most cases, it's relatively shortly after we start the investigation.
And then the last follow-up question, if released under an OWI, does someone else have to come drive them away?
Well, in this case, the vehicle, I believe, was parked because he couldn't drive it away. And the passengers also, I believe, admitted to smoking marijuana with the driver. So in a lot of these cases, we just park the car and give them the keys and tell them not to return, or to bring somebody who's got a valid driver's license to return to the car to drive it away.
Okay. I think
Thanks
that was
for
the
that
last
clarification.
question. Tom, did you? Yeah.
It just read funny to me, like, oh, we released him.
Tom, did you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, so on the answer to how did we determine he was a minor, it was that he already did have a driver's license that was revoked. What if he didn't have a, what if he didn't have a driver's license? What if he was, under the age of driving, or what if he was a person who doesn't have any ID?
Yep, we go through other means to try to identify the driver. We might ask the passengers, do you know who is driving? We try to get a verbal ID first and verify that with the passengers. We might try to get a hold of a parent. They might have a school ID in their wallets. There's other ways that we can try to identify juveniles, but in this particular case, again, he had already been stopped for a traffic violation, was already on file, because even if you don't have a license and you get a ticket, you end up with a driver's license number. It just shows that you don't have a driver's license, and in this particular case, he was suspended, so he was already on file with DOT.
But sometimes it does become a problem to identify somebody, right? I mean, I'm guessing sometimes they're not
Yeah, they don't want to
authorized to be here.
Yep, and we have like a fast ID, so we can fingerprint people in one of our cars. We can bring on a mobile unit where we can use their index finger placed on there, and that can identify them too. It happens quite frequently, but we have a lot of different means to try to identify somebody.
Did the people were under the had all smoked. Was there arrests then made related to the use of marijuana?
There was not, so the officers weren't able to determine that he was operating while under the influence. So they got to go through field sobriety. They got to determine that he wasn't capable of operating a motor vehicle safely. They weren't able to determine that based on the field sobriety testing, but he was issued citations for operating while suspended.
So he wasn't like, because there was no possession, it was only paraphernalia that he wouldn't have. He
passed the field side sobriety test.
Yeah.
Okay, so, but he probably had some marijuana in the car, right? Or
they had smoked it up. They had paraphernalia, but that's based on kind of Dane County rules. We don't charge people for drug paraphernalia. They don't get charged by the district attorney's office for that. Okay, well, that's interesting and good to know, and probably a good thing, being that a lot of states are now trying to legalize it.
What was the racial makeup of the people involved?
Let me look in the reports. I don't know if I have the racial makeup on the report there, Jeff. I can. Yeah, I believe Hispanic from what I'm seeing in the report.
All right.
So the second complaint came in on November 12th, and it's a procedure, and the individual did not return the complaint form, but they had called the police department because they were concerned about some new neighbors in their apartment complex who had a dog. This individual was fearful of dogs. The dog was not acting aggressively, never showed any signs of aggression, but they were concerned as they thought the homeowner or the owners of the dog sometimes were allowing the dog off leash too far. The dog might be on leash, but they were allowing the dog to get off leash too far. And sometimes they saw the dog roaming the complex not on leash. So they wanted the police department to deal with this, and the officer spoke with the complainant and said that there's no violation. The dog is not acting aggressive. It's on private property. It's not something that law enforcement would get involved in. The complainant became very upset. In fact, started screaming at the officer on the telephone, telling the officer that he needed to act. And they became so uncooperative that the officer ended the conversation with this individual. Interesting to note, during the officer's conversation with the complainant, they indicated that they had written 92 letters to the apartment management about dogs and their concern about dogs. And again, they admitted that this dog that they were referencing was not aggressive, had never shown any signs of aggression, but they were fearful of dogs based on their previous experience with dogs. So they were adamant that this dog needed to be leashed and be more under control, and again, wanted the police department to handle it, and it did not fall under our authority to do so. So after the conversation, the officer, where the complainant got pretty upset, the officer terminated that conversation by telephone. And this was labeled as undetermined because we had no recording of the phone call to conclude whether the officer was in fact rude. The officer said when they were interviewed that they were not rude, and in fact the complainant was the one who was screaming and being unreasonable. So we weren't able to determine whether there's a violation of policy, but again, 92 letters that they had written to the management about dogs. Obviously they have some pretty strong feelings about animals, and wanted us to get involved in something that we had no business getting involved in.
I've been on the other end of that. I had a dog where I was the person being complained about, but they were also claiming that I was abusing the dog, and I left it out on my patio in cold weather, and they were gonna have the dog confiscated for dog abuse or something, and they never involved the police. But my dog was 18 years old, and it saw the vet frequently. I had a dog that had cancer that I spent a lot of money on medical care, and the vet said, they're going to try to take your dog away, I'm going to show up at that one. Because he said, you're the nicest dog owner we have. But the people that are afraid of dogs get really hostile. I think I heard of another story of one who, where the guy said he was going to shoot the dog. And that one, I understand, actually did involve the police department, and the management company turned it over. But I don't know, I just thought I'd try to relate to that.
Hey, everyone.
A lot of stuff.
I don't want to
Hello.
interrupt. I'm about to step off to council and just wanted to say, hey, hope you're having a good meeting, and have a wonderful night, you guys. I see you're talking about stats and welcoming the newly promoted lieutenants. So that's a wonderful meeting, and I just wanted to say hi. So
can I ask
Thank you, Emily.
one question? Emily, I think Middleton Beach Road is very dog friendly, no?
Yes, I can tell you, there was a vote about some green space, and I voted pro dog.
Okay, good for you.
Yes.
You all need to understand. So if you ever need me to talk about pro dog, I'm pro dog. So
okay, good.
It's a good platform issue. That and potholes. It's really safe.
Yeah.
Emily Keene, everybody.
Yeah.
Was that
What is
okay? Or was that appropriate? I don't know.
That's fine. What is the department's policy about recording calls for incoming calls to detectives for complaints? And is there a general switch that, hey, maybe I need to record this, or is it just as it comes along? So.
It kind of depends, Jeff. That's a great question. So we actually have 2 lines in the police department that are recorded. So if an officer is able to get back to the police department, they can be in the station and have it recorded. But a lot of times now with technology, the officers are, and for efficient sakes, they're in the squads, and they're making the phone calls on their cellular telephones, so they're not recorded. Some officers will activate their body-worn cameras if they think it's kind of going in a downward turn, but there's no requirement that they have to. But a lot of officers do that if they are dealing with somebody who is angry. In this particular case, the officer didn't. But there's no violation for not activating their body worn cameras for something like that, because we get a lot of people who are angry that we don't take action in a case where they think we should be. So we'd have a lot of body worn camera footage if we recorded every single time somebody was upset with the police department. Good question though. So the next, the third complaint that we had was on November 6th, and this was a procedure complaint, and this was returned. So we had a check welfare call. An adult male we were asked to check on his welfare after his ex-wife and many other family and friends, had not heard from him in a couple of days. He wasn't on social media, which sounded like it was kind of abnormal for him. Nobody had heard from him, so they're kind of worried about him. The officers made contact with the ex-wife at the house. She said she was very concerned. She had a key to get in. The officers said they didn't want to enter the home at that point yet. They tried by telephone to reach him, got voicemail. They knocked on the front door, did not get him to answer the door. So they walked around the house to see if they can kind of peer in, which is pretty normal for us to see if we see somebody down on the floor, or a lot of times we'll see that they're in distress by being on the floor, and then we got to make forced entry. In this particular case, they were able to see that he was sleeping in his bedroom. They shined the flashlight. They were able to get him awake, and he became very upset that the officers were there. And as you can see, he thought they were sulking around like a thief and scaring folks to death. He was outrageous. He was really upset that others were asking the police to check on him, and basically said, "I'm fine. I'm trying to sleep because I wanted to get up at 2 a.m. to look at the stars." And then the officers left. They said that they saw no issues. They told the ex-wife that he was fine, and they completed their call. The individual then filed a complaint, and the officers are exonerated. Again, we had every reason to check his welfare to make sure he is okay. The officers didn't force entry. They did everything that we asked them to do, try to make contact by other means. They did that by seeing him in his bedroom, shine their flashlight, woke him up, checked his welfare, and then left the scene. So we saw no violations of our procedures and policies. The officers did everything that we'd asked them to do. But again, this was a complaint that we received by the individual that we're checking his welfare. Questions on that one? What's that, Tom?
Do we track the number of welfare checks we do a month?
We track everything. Yeah, I can run a report and see all the check welfares. There's daily, I bet you we get a check welfare call on somebody who didn't show up for work, or somebody saw something online that they were suicidal, and the officers are asked to go check their welfare. So it's a pretty common call for us. So if my employer called and said I failed to show at work, how long would it take before the police would enter by force? You kind of cut out at the end, but you're asking how long it would take. It'd go into our queue for calls, and if we have officers available, we'd send them right away. But I'd say that's kind of a higher priority call for us. Obviously, if somebody, it's abnormal for them not to show up for work, we'd want to get there as soon as possible and check their welfare, whether they fell in their bathroom or in the driveway, whether they were having a medical emergency. We try to get there pretty quickly for those, but again, it goes into the queue for calls and it gets prioritized that way.
This is, for me, it's the big distinction between thinking of it as police enforcement and police as public safety officers. I mean, it's really, honestly, I think it's the coolest thing you guys do. I mean, with all the stuff you do, that is the direct connection with the community, that we have someone to call to say, hey, there's just something weird. Now, you get into potentially privacy and personal stuff, fine. But in this community, it's an awesome service. So absolutely.
And it's probably a difficult call to when to break in. We had a case here where the person was dead and they waited a week. And I guess I would have liked to have seen, I think because the person's car wasn't here, they assumed they weren't here. But if a person's missing, I know it's a hard call. It's a no-win call, because, if they're okay, you get a lot of guff. And if they're not okay, you get a lot of guff. And so I realize, but because it's a difficult call, all the more reason to have some kind of procedure on what would be appropriate. I would like to see, I think, I'm guessing sometimes a life could be saved by an early entry, which is that safety aspect, which was the reason I, am on the committee is because of an interest in the safety aspect of policing. So I don't know, does that make sense?
It does, but there's rules. I mean, we just can't break into people's homes. We gotta, there's certain things, certain criteria that we have to meet.
Yeah.
If you wanted the police department to get sued, all we need to do is break into people's homes.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, unfortunately, that you do have to look at all these people that are angry when the police are trying to do something good. So it's balancing the two.
Yeah.
So are the rules for something like that determined, based on police policy and procedure, or is there a standard that all police use for as to when to enter in that kind of a situation?
A little bit of both, and it depends on every circumstance is so different. Like you talk about the case with the cars gone. I mean, that's a determining factor. There's no law that is broken by somebody who wants to disappear and they
Right.
don't want contact with folks. So we can't, if somebody's car's gone, that's one of the things that we determine. Well, if that's what they normally drive and the car's not there, there's a good chance that they're probably not at the apartment, and it doesn't give us justification just to break in the door. But maybe there's mail piling up for a week. Maybe they had a suicidal message that they left a coworker a week ago that they're in a state of depression. There's a lot of factors that go into it, and we try not to force entry into a home unless we really feel somebody's in danger, imminent danger, that we could save their life. But the castle is what they're called. Everybody's home is a castle. You look at the law, and the last thing we want to do is to violate that. If the sure way to get a complaint is forcing entry into somebody's home, and violating kind of that sacred ground that people believe their house is. So we take each of these cases very seriously, but we got to be careful that we don't violate people's rights by just entering because we feel like we could save a life. We have to have good information, background information to enter somebody's home.
Yeah, it's a good way to accidentally get shot.
Yeah, castle doctrine. Yeah.
Any other questions on that complaint? So the fourth complaint stemmed from a traffic stop. A vehicle was going 13 miles over the speed limits late at night. Actually, it might have been early morning, actually. Disparate treatment was the complaint. The complaint form was not returned. While the officer was conducting the traffic stop, the vehicle turned out to be stolen out of Illinois. It turned out that the vehicle was actually stolen out of a parking lot of Hertz Rental, and had been being driven around by multiple people for months. This was verified by the officer after the traffic stop and after the individual was taken to jail, but this is a vehicle that was reported stolen. So a case that's vehicle still reported stolen obviously is a felony. It draws the attention of officers. There's a lot of risk involved in that. So you're gonna have a lot of officers helping out on this call. It's not normal for people to have a stolen vehicle, and usually if they have a stolen vehicle, they're up to most of the times no good. So the officers were taking this pretty seriously, but the individual afterwards filed a complaint with the officer or with the supervisor. Again, did not return the form, but again, we investigated the complaint as if they did return the form back to the police department. So the first complaint was the officer followed the individual for an unreasonable amount of time. They claimed from Gammon Road, Highway 12 to Middleton. This was unfounded. We have GPS in our cars. The officer spotted the vehicle speeding in Middleton. The officer never left the Middleton city limits, and then they stopped the individual at Palmer Street and Highway 12 in Middleton. So that was unfounded. That wasn't a legitimate complaint based on our GPS data. Excessive force was used at the Dane County Jail. That was one of the claims. So when the individual got to the Dane County Jail, we turned them over to the staff. We're there, but we turn over the custody of them when we get to the jail. In this case, the jail deputies took off the handcuffs. This individual became uncooperative, put themselves on the ground, started a fight with the deputies. Our officer just assisted the deputies by securing the individual's legs as the deputies were getting him back into custody. So the claim was excessive force, but it really wasn't against the Middleton officer because the excessive force he's claiming actually happened at the Dane County Jail. But based on the fact that our officer was involved assisting the deputies, we did look into it. But again, based on our review, it was brief, it's justified within our policy, and it was necessary to prevent this individual from injuring deputies and himself while being booked into the jail. The third complaint where the handcuffs were too tight and not checked after complaints were made. The officer, and based on body worn camera, placed the individual in handcuffs. That's normal. And twice at the police department, when this individual complained about discomfort with the handcuffs, the officers checked them and adjusted them, which is very normal. We do that all the time. So again, that was unfounded. We didn't have them too tight. That is a constant complaint we hear. And handcuffs aren't made for comfort. They do hurt, especially when people move around. But again, the officer checked them twice and readjusted them twice when the individual claimed that they were too tight. Number 4, there was an aggressive police response to investigate the stolen vehicle. This was unfounded. Again, a stolen vehicle is a felony, a pretty serious case. We're going to have as many officers as we can get there to make sure that the officers are safe and that we do a good job investigating this case. So based on the body worn camera, responding officers are calm and patient with the driver despite his being aggressive or argumentating and physically resistive behavior. Number 5, the officer was harassing the complainant and they had stopped him 6 or 7 times since May. This was inaccurate. The driver had been stopped 2 previous occasions by the same officer in 1.5 years. But in this particular case, the officer had no idea this was the same driver. It was a stolen vehicle. It was speeding. The officer had no idea it's the same driver that he had stopped previously. And the 6th complaint was the officer had poor demeanor. Based on body worn camera and all the footage which was reviewed, the officer was found to be calm and polite throughout the incident. Again, even though the arrestee was uncooperative and physically resisted officers both at the time of arrest and at the jail. After the investigation was completed, this complaint was determined to be unfounded. Also in the car was AR-15 that was found in the trunk, which nobody took ownership of, and some other items that were concerning to our staff, which could have caused some serious injuries to our officers. But the fact that the driver and a passenger who was in the car did not claim ownership of the AR-15 is concerning, as it's a pretty expensive weapon, and we wonder what they were up to with that weapon if nobody claimed ownership of that. Questions on this complaint?
Is there ammunition present?
There was ammunition. The AR-15 had a bullet in the chamber and a full magazine in the magazine well.
And was
this guy stopped 6 or 7?
Sorry, Jeff, you were cut off.
So was this guy like stopped 6 or 7 times by the Middleton PD in general, or did?
No, no, he wasn't. Again, he had been stopped 2 times by this officer. Interesting fact is we've gotten some complaints about this individual and some short-term traffic in the apartment complex that he's living. So some of our previous contacts with him with the Middleton Police Department had to do with reports of drug trafficking or drug dealing. So any previous contacts were not self-initiated, but more initiated by callers in the apartment complex who were concerned about their behavior.
It seems like all these complaints are, not legitimate. But it brings me to another thought about what can apartments and condos do to more quickly alert, or to, if a car is abandoned. I had a car, I used to actually live in Chicago and just was here on weekends. And I had a car that was snowed in next to my car all winter. And I was suspicious that that car didn't belong there. And I complained to the condo about it. But does the police have any advice about, should we inquire about cars we're not sure of? Should we be more diligent about knowing what cars should be in our lot? Or, is there just something we can do to be proactive to help catch stolen cars? By the way, my dad also had his car stolen, and it was abandoned and vandalized in the Lake Street. It ended up in the Lake Street ramp in downtown Madison. And he was called a week later by the police saying that his car was going to be towed for being parked there too long. And they didn't even check to see if it was stolen, so he's getting flack because he supposedly abandoned his car in the Lake Street ramp when it had been reported stolen. So sometimes,
Tom,
yeah.
I'd like us to get through the focus. I love your stories, but not in the middle of trying to get through the complaints.
Okay.
We get through the complaints and the response.
All right. Yes. Sorry.
Thanks.
And then the last complaint was on November 29th. It's a use of force complaint. Again, the complainant did not return the form back. But again, I want to emphasize that we still completed a full complaint investigation. So a lot of these times, like I mentioned before, we will get complaints shortly after an incident because somebody's very upset. They will ask to speak with the supervisor to us. That's a complaint. We do a full investigation. A lot of departments do not do investigations unless they get the complaint form back. That is not our department. We take every single complaint very seriously. And again, another example in this case right here. So this individual was stopped for speeding. I believe they were going 18 over the speed limit on Allen Boulevard. Yeah, it states there, and the number one, the officer harassed the complainant during the traffic stop. So they were stopped for going 18 over the speed limit. They admitted to driving aggressively to the initial officer who stopped them. We looked at body worn camera. The officer was polite and professional and allowed the driver to explain why she was speeding before issuing the citation. The driver was upset. So they followed the police officer back to the police department, and the officer saw that the driver was following the officer, or the driver was following the officer back to the police department. The officer was kind of concerned about this and radioed to the other officers that this driver was following them back. Not sure why they were following the officer, but two other officers showed up, and the driver went into the police department to pay their citation that they just received for speeding. As they were coming out, the two officers made contact with the individual to see, why they followed the officer. And while speaking with the driver, they smelled a very strong odor of intoxicants, and were concerned about her driving. In fact, she was later arrested for drunk driving, was over 2 times over the legal limit for drunk driving. And when they were investigating the odor of intoxicants, they told her that she wasn't free to leave. They were concerned about her driving away. She tried to walk away several times, tried to get by the officers, brushed by one of the officers. And one of the complaints she had is that the excessive force was used by the 2 officers during her arrest. Body worn camera was viewed. The only thing the officers did is to grab a hold of, as you can see at the bottom here, the only level of force that was used was to redirect her and lightly take a hold of the driver's upper arms over her coat to prevent her from leaving. This level of force was appropriate and justified, and truly really wasn't force, even though she's claiming that. The officers were just trying to make sure she did not walk away when they were telling her not to walk away because they were concerned for her welfare. She also wanted to file a complaint against 2 other officers who were involved, but she did not articulate what they had done wrong. A review of all the video of the officers involved found that all of them acted appropriately and did nothing wrong. This complaint was fully investigated and was closed as unfounded. So any questions on that complaint? So 5 complaints in the last quarter.
I assume she failed her field sobriety tests.
She did, and then again was arrested and was well over 2 times the legal limit in the state of Wisconsin for alcohol in her system.
That's impressive.
Any other questions about the complaints? Any concerns? Anything about a specific complaint that anybody wants more details on?
No, but thank you for going through these.
Yeah.
I also just like to add that getting some of the racial makeup of some of these cases, especially with traffic stops, I think that would be really useful just to see if that's a factor in these complaints.
Definitely, we can add that, Jeff. That's easy to do. And I should have started by saying Travis usually gives the updates on these, but he is enjoying the sunny weather in Florida and probably enjoying a drink right now. So I'm filling in for him, but we will definitely add that for future reviews of these things, Jeff.
He doesn't know what he's missing.
Right.
He shared some pictures. I'm kind of jealous.
Thank you for that. If we're no other comments or questions, we can move on to the next agenda item for department stats and updates.
Actually, let me stop the screen. I think I have one that doesn't have a couple other the breakdowns of the year. I just did that the final year tally. Just a minute. Let me see if I can find that.
Sure.
Oh, I must have pulled up the wrong one. This will do. Not to waste everybody's time. And of course I closed it. So let me find it again. Just a minute.
Bartlett, I don't recognize you without a background.
I know, it's sad, isn't it? My son has commandeered my Zoom account for Scouts.
Oh.
So,
just like the white wall, there's something you got to be able to do with that, man. I mean, it's,
I probably could, but just, I've got an old laptop. It's just, I'll come up with more excuses.
All right, I apologize. I can't minimize my screen while I'm in the Zoom, it says. And let me see if I can get the agenda up. And it's not let me share the rest of the agenda.
We see the agenda.
Yeah, and I don't have the.
Well, in my copy of the agenda, I have, I can't share, can I?
PDF at the end. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah, there's department stats. And of course, I closed out the Excel spreadsheet that I didn't want up, and now I can't get to that folder because it says I can't minimize my screen. But if you've seen those, there was nothing earth-shattering that I was going to share with all of you. You can kind of see that our numbers are a little bit lower, which is not something that is shocking based on COVID. So we had those 2 months there with March and April and even May a little bit in 2020, where the city and our kind of our country kind of came to a standstill, and our calls for service really it kind of just nosedived. There wasn't much activity, but that did pick up. We're down a few thousand of calls, but that's not shocking to me. If you look at some of those stats, our domestics are up. I think we ended at 180 domestics. We average about 120. Again, not shocking based on COVID. Our DOT registrations, we ended up about with a 900, and we average about 50. So again, that's something I mentioned in one of our previous meetings that I'm kind of concerned about and something we're monitoring, but a significant increase, and that has a huge impact on our staff as they're dealing with a lot of foot traffic in our lobby and taking away from other duties that they need to be doing, including typing reports for our staff. And I'm trying to think of any others that were on there. Robberies were down, burglaries were down, but that's pretty normal based on businesses being closed, people working from home. A lot of those things aren't shocking based on COVID, but we are seeing numbers start to increase. We had, again, I mentioned a few times, pretty significant mental health calls that our officers have done some fantastic work on, de-escalation. A couple of weeks ago, I think they saved an individual's life based on them with their self-harm, and the officers doing a fantastic job getting entry to a hotel room, and I believe saving this individual's life based on their suicide attempt. So our staff has been busy. We're definitely seeing an increase of calls related to mental health, overdoses, alcohol abuse. And again, nothing that is shocking based on what we've gone through in 2020 specific to COVID. So I apologize, I don't have the stats up, but those were kind of the main highlights I was going to bring up. Hopefully you've all had a chance to look at them. But if there's any stats that kind of stand out, if you're looking at that spreadsheet, just feel free to ask any questions.
Yeah, there's the last one, crime notices sent. What are those?
Yeah, so if we get, we get a bunch of burglaries in a neighborhood, we'll send out those crime notices. Those are actually, sorry, Bartlett, different. So officers will go around and they'll do like, they see a garage door open. They will actually leave a crime notice on the homeowner's front door in the mailbox, on the outside of the mailbox saying, your garage door was open, please close it. Maybe there's a light out that, it kind of allows an individual to hide out near the house and could break into the house. So we go around at night and we actually hand out crime notices, and just kind of a proactive thing to hopefully prevent crime from happening in the future. But a lot of it right now is related to garage doors being open, a car door being left open, anything like that. We're just trying to prevent those burglaries from occurring that we've seen throughout Dane County over the last couple of years. The crime in that area, especially with stolen vehicles and burglaries, have definitely increased. So those are the crime notices. Good question, Bartlett.
Yeah, thanks.
I don't see the welfare checks on this list, actually, now that I'm looking at it.
Yeah, I was wondering if those fall under a different category.
Yeah, they do. I mean, we can break down. We have noise disturbances. We have welfare checks. We have alcohol complaints. That list could be 250, Jeff, and those are kind of the main ones. I kind of give the overview of the department stats, but if that's something that you guys want, I can start adding those too. But that list could go on and on. You could ask about calls at the high school or at the schools. We could add those too. But those are just kind of the main highlights that we've always kind of been asked a lot of questions about that we try to provide. But yeah, welfare checks is something that we also track too.
Before we jump on to the lieutenants, there are two things I wanted to follow up from the last meeting we had. So I don't know if now's the time to do it or if there's a better time.
Unless there's any objections, I'm good with that Bartlett or anybody else.
Rebecca,
I think that works. I think that's great. Yep.
Okay, so we had talked about the Scram program last time, and we'd asked to look into the stickers. There's something about it. It very much looked to us like we were actively surveilling. Did you get a chance to follow up on that?
Yep, new design has been completed. We also completed a department policy, and I think Jeff asked for some periodic reviews in front of this board. So we're prepared at some point to bring it back, but we made all the changes as suggested by this committee. And Lieutenant
great.
Zimmerman's on here too. He can answer any questions about it, but he informed me that the sticker had been changed and the policy has been developed.
Awesome, thanks so much for that. And the other one, how did it go with the comprehensive plan and the request for a new officer? I think I saw a new officer, but it may just be a replacement officer.
Yeah, it's a discussion that this committee is going to have in mid-year. So we did not get an officer or a dispatcher position in the budget. In addition to that, Detective Faust, after 38 years, or is it 38, Darren, or is it 31? 32 years she retired. She retired. So many people retiring. She retired, and I was trying to replace her position. There was a lot of concern on council that based on the SRO positions not currently being approved by the school district and no reimbursement coming to the city for those positions, that we have a little bit of a budget deficit that we have to cover. So I had to delay the hiring of replacing Detective Faust until June of 21 to kind of make up for those funds. So we have not added any additional positions. It's something, again, it's badly needed based on the staffing study, our calls for service. And as the city continues to grow, and again, I mentioned numerous times that we're probably going to have some tough discussions in the next year or two if we can't start adding staff as the city continues to grow with some pretty significant apartment complexes that generate a lot of calls for the police department. But we have not added any additional staff. I think what you saw, Bartlett, was trying to replace Patty's position.
Okay. Yeah, that's too bad, but I think we made a good pitch. I know I heard you were eloquent in your discussion of it on council. I just didn't know where it had gone from there. So I think let's definitely keep that high on our agenda for us to put in we put in a strong letter this time, but maybe Rebecca or I have to actually go down there and crack some heads or something.
I'll let you and Rebecca take care of that.
Yeah.
All right. And then the last thing I wanted to raise is on the SRO position. I know there's ongoing discussions with the school and all that. Is there a role that we can play in that?
I don't think at this point anymore, Bartlett. The comprehensive review is kind of coming to an end. I think they're in the midst of kind of wrapping it up. I think they're working on focus groups right now. There's a survey that went out to parents, students, and staff. I think that had to be returned on January 14th. And they're compiling all that data, and then they're doing some focus groups with the goal, I believe, is bringing back a final report to the school board and the city council in mid-March. Unfortunately, their school's going to be back in session, including probably Cromery and the high school, and we don't have a current agreement in place. So school will probably be in session without SROs. Calls for service at the high school are still going to continue, even at Cromery, and we're going to have to try to make that work with our staffing that we have in patrol. My concern, and as I've been expressing this all along, is that goes into a queue for calls. So there's not a dedicated officer at those schools anymore. So if there's a theft at the high school, instead of contacting the officer assigned to that school, it's going to go into a queue with all the other calls. So we might have an injury accident, we might have a domestic, we might have an overdose. That might wait for hours. We might not even get to it until the next shift. I don't think people understand how many calls for service we have at the high school and how busy the officer is. And the ramifications of not having the officer there is going to be huge, not only for calls for service, but the relationship building that we have with those kids. I'm fearful if we don't get the officer back in the high school. That is our highest call address in the city of Middleton every single year. And if I don't have an officer there, that pulls from other resources on the streets. So if you called and you had a theft and I have an officer dealing with a sexual assault at the high school, you're going to be waiting for an officer to respond to your house for something, because I only have so many officers to go around and answer calls. And without a dedicated officer at the high school, that's a significant impact on our staffing. So I don't think at this point there's anything else that anybody can do in this group. We're just kind of waiting for that final report from the school, and hopefully coming back in front of the city council, and the city council will have to vote on the new SRO agreement. Again, hopefully mid-March, maybe at the end of March, but it appears school is going to be in session and we're not going to have officers at Creamery and at the high school at this point.
Okay. Not happy, but thank you for your thorough answer.
No problem. Any other follow-up questions? Anything else?
Not for
I would
me.
like to see a draft of what you guys developed on Scram.
On screen, okay.
Yeah.
Yep, we can do that for the next meeting, Jeff, or would you like to even send you, we can send you an email directly if no one else is interested in it, but we can definitely bring it back to the next meeting.
What does the rest of the committee think? I mean, I'm happy either way with it. So.
I'd like to
Jesse,
see
if you,
Yeah, I think it'd be great. Yeah.
a neighborhood association about it, but to have more updated materials would be great.
Mhm.
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. We'll bring that, I'll put that on the next agenda for the next meeting. We can definitely show you what we developed, and the policy, or just the new design.
Policy and design.
Okay, sounds good. All right, and then, well, I don't want to steal your thunder, Rebecca. You can move us on to the
No,
next agenda
no,
item.
go ahead. Yeah, next agenda item, introduction of department members newly promoted to lieutenants.
Bartlett, I think you brought this up, and I think it's a great idea to introduce some of our staff to all of you as being part of our public safety committee, and the lieutenants, I think was suggested, and I think that's a great place to start. So we recently promoted 4 new lieutenants. One of our lieutenants, if you didn't hear earlier, is currently working a lovely 3 a.m. to 11 a.m. shift. So he is sleeping right now. He requested this morning if he asked if he could decline this meeting, and I thought I'd be nice, and I told him to get some sleep. So you have 3 out of the 4 new lieutenants here. I asked them to kind of give a brief introduction of themselves, what they specialize in, what shift they're on. And so it's Detective Lieutenant Darren Zimmerman, we have Lieutenant Scott Moan, and Lieutenant Tyler Lather. And with that, I will turn it over, and we'll start with Darren Zimmerman.
Troy, do you think you could stop sharing so we could see them?
Good point, definitely.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks, Troy. First off, I'm gonna apologize for this awful camera. I don't know why I've got a yellow tint going on here, or blur, so I apologize. So I've been with Middleton for 22 years. Pretty much my entire career, law enforcement career, has been with Middleton. I spent 1.5 years with Short Hills before that. So started my career in '98. And with Middleton, I've worked every shift that we have, first, second, thirds. Was an FTO early on, a DARE instructor when we used to do that. I'm a defense and arrest tactics instructor, a professional communications instructor. And then I was promoted, well, not promoted, but I got assigned to detective. And as a SRO, that was my other big assignment too, which was fantastic. And then straight out of the high school, detective, and that was in about 06. So 2 years as a detective, which I found out that I really loved. And I knew that I wanted to supervise the detectives at some point, and to do that at our agency, it had to promote first to sergeant and go back to patrols, which I did. And I did that for, since 2008, I was promoted to sergeant. So the past, 8-10 years, I was doing that. Again, working thirds, all 3 of the shifts as a patrol sergeant, and then got detective sergeant 3 years ago, 3 years ago. and then now promoted to detective lieutenant. It truly is what I feel like my calling is. I absolutely love it. I love the detective work. I love supervising the detectives. We've got a great unit, and I really truly enjoy it. On a personal note, I got my wife, who's also our court officer, and she's been with the police department for 18 years. She was a records clerk for well, up until a couple of years ago, until she was promoted to our court officer. And then we've got our two kids who are Matthew's 17 and Mackenzie's 16. And obviously they go to school here. We live here in Middleton, North Lake, and absolutely love it. Wouldn't have it any other way. So I enjoy again being in the detective bureau and kind of handling those big calls. It's very time consuming. I end up reviewing about 900 to 1,000 cases a year, and make a determination on whether those need to be assigned to detective or back to patrol for more follow-up, or enough's been done and it can be closed out. Along with that, supervising the SROs and the community awareness officers as well. So it's a very, I've got my phone on me. I get calls in the middle of the night, and providing guidance and making determination on whether detectives need to come in. But I've handled some pretty big cases. I'm pretty proud of those and the Detective Bureau and this agency, because quite frankly, when I do a lot of meetings with other agencies here in Dane County, and I'm very proud of Middleton and the way we do things, and the way we treat our officers and handle our cases. And it shows. You can see other officers coming to us and, oh boy, Middleton would be really great, or you can see some officers kind of jealous of the way we have it in Middleton and the way we're treated, and the family atmosphere that we've kind of created here over the past 20 some years, because it wasn't like that when Troy and I started back in '99. So it's great. So that's a little bit about me. If you guys got questions, by all means, fire away.
Yeah, your chief is defending you. Can you tilt your head down a little bit? I'm gonna see your hat.
Oh, it's Cardinals.
That's a Middleton Cardinal? Okay.
It is.
Yeah, we're
Well,
worried we hired a Patriots fan. We're like, how did that happen?
No, and if my camera worked, maybe you'd be able to tell that, right?
Well, thank you for your years of service. It's Middleton's wonderful, and a big part of that is our police department. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, I also did fire and EMS prior to kids, and then the kids came and I didn't have extra time for that. So
Thanks, Darren. Lieutenant Scott Moan, if you want to introduce yourself.
All right, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I've been, this will be my 15th year in law enforcement, a little over, I think this is my 12th with Middleton. Before that, I worked for the city of Whitewater. I came back up here because I went to college at UW-Madison and I wanted to get back in this area. So applied back to Middleton here to get up in this area and live with my wife. I have two little daughters, 6 and 3 years old. So they take all my time right now. Mm-hmm. My official position is second shift patrol lieutenant. So that's why I'm in uniform. I actually spent the first part of my day today teaching the chief how to shoot it in service. So I have many different roles besides the patrol lieutenant. I am currently our tracks assistant administrator. So that's our ticket system and accident system that goes to the state. I'm also the assistant training coordinator with Lieutenant Lather. I'm our canine unit supervisor, and I am also our special response team commander. That team is the team that does crowd control and also does warrants for our department. Prior to those roles, I've had other roles in the department as well. I was a field training officer for a while. I was a school resource officer until the spring of 2014, where I was promoted to sergeant. And then I worked as a sergeant on a second and third shift until I was recently promoted to lieutenant. So kind of a whole lot of things I've done. I'm also an instructor in active shooter response, rifle and handgun, and EVOC, which is our driving emergency vehicles, and our vehicle contacts, which is how to do traffic stops, basically. So my specialization, I guess, is tactics and instructing outside of the actual patrol stuff I do on a daily basis. So that's, I guess, a little about being my background. Questions for me at all? I don't have a Cardinals hat or a Patriots hat, sorry.
All right.
No, that's great.
Thanks, Scott. And Lieutenant Tyler Lather.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Tyler Lather. I am the third shift lieutenant. Like Lieutenant Moen, I was also teaching in service this morning, so I'm still wide awake and not in my normal sleep pattern here. And thankfully, Lieutenant Zimmerman put on the taser suit for us today, so we actually had a live role player in our training for our annual taser recertification for all our officers, which provided some stress inducement and realism to our training. So we had a great day. 8 hours of training for our staff earlier today. But specifically with me, so I am an alumni of the University of Wisconsin Marching Band. I'm from Sauk City originally, so not far from Middleton, very familiar with the area. I have 10 years of experience in law enforcement, a couple of years with the Janesville Police Department before coming up to Middleton. I've been here for the past 8 years. Some specialized roles that I have had, I've served as a detective, school resource officer at the high school, and I'm an instructor in defensive and arrest tactics, taser, EVOC, and vehicle contacts with Lieutenant Moen. My roles specifically as a lieutenant, I also am an assistant training coordinator with Lieutenant Moen, and I supervise our field training program. I'm a field training coordinator. So when we hire new officers, they go through an extensive training program that's multiple months long, where they're evaluated constantly. So that's one of my big collateral duties as a lieutenant. And in addition to all of that, I am currently in a graduate school program with the University of Wisconsin-Platteville. It's an online program for criminal justice management, and I am officially 1 year in. My next class actually starts up next week, so I'm gonna have to open those books back up here. But that's a little background on me.
Thanks, Tyler. And then our fourth lieutenant is Terry Hansen. He's assigned to day shift. Terry's been with us, I think, since the early 90s, and we call Terry our computer guru. He is fantastic with technology, and we can assign him any new program, technology-based, and he figures it out. And we just transitioned to a new records management system, and Terry was, I don't know where we'd be without him. He actually spent a ton of time training our staff, getting to know the program, and getting us to a point where all of us felt pretty comfortable using the new records management system. So Terry's getting closer to retirement. I think he's made it well known as he's only a couple years away, and he's going to be sorely missed when he's gone, because his technology and the way he thinks about things is, I don't think that way. So he is very tech savvy, and again, sleeping right now, because when we have training, like what you're hearing that we had in service training today, we have instructors who are supervisors, but we have 24-hour supervisory coverage. So we need to cover that somehow, and supervisors get flex to cover those vacancies. So Terry, unfortunately, drew the smaller straw on this one, and he's got to get up at 3 a.m. and work till a lovely 11 a.m. and then get kicked out. And I'm sure he's not gonna be fighting over that, getting kicked out at 11 a.m. so he can get home and get a good nap or something in. But that's our fourth lieutenants. Again, new positions that were created this year. They were budgeted in 2020. It's something that's been in our staffing study since I think about 2010. That they kept saying that there was a big gap between our sergeants and our captains, that there needed to be another layer of command. Prior to our lieutenants, it was 2 supervisors trying to guide 1 patrol shift. Kind of created some issues as you had equal rank supervisors that were trying to give guidance, and this kind of gives a little bit more of a shift commander designation to our lieutenants, where 1 individual is providing shift goals and direction instead of some of the confusion that we've had in the past. So it's a really good move for our departments, and I'm happy for all 4 of them getting promoted to lieutenants, and that is basically it for them. Any questions for any of them on anything that they shared tonight?
Well, observation. I mean, all of you here were SRO officers. What about, who was the other guy who's not here? Missed his
Terry,
name.
he was not an SRO. He was too busy working on computers.
Yeah, well, I'm just wondering how, given the other discussion going on, how many of our officers as a whole, and especially the higher ranked ones, were SRO? I mean, it seems like it's foundational to what we are as a department.
A vast majority of our current command staff were in the role at some point of being an SRO. So Captain Geyser was, Travis Kukuski, he's a captain. He was Darren, Tyler, Scott's. Trying to go through their list real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any others that I'm missing, guys? Prior to Steve Britt retiring, he was an SRO. Chuck Falk, prior to his retirement, he was an SRO during his career. So a vast majority of our command staff are SROs or have been SROs in the past. And, you know, we've told everybody that is, at least for me, is probably one of the most rewarding positions I've ever held in my career. The relationships I've built with students, with staff at the high school and at Cromery at the time, since we didn't have a second SRO when I first started at the high school and I was in charge of both schools. But it's by far the most rewarding position I've held in my 27 years in law enforcement.
So not to revisit I'm going to revisit it. So I'm going to go there. I'm growing increasingly upset over this SRO issue. Because we've just talked about how well regarded you guys are, the department is, how much it means to Middleton as a whole, the community service you do for us. And there is this schism, and I understand where it comes from, but there's this schism, like high school or the school is like this standalone entity separate from our community. And yet so much of what you bring to the community and the community brings starts there. I mean, they're our kids. For crying out loud, they're your kids. So I don't know where to go with that yet, but I'm going to keep working on that because I think it's a story that needs to be told, and how much the schools are part of our community and the SRO officer is a conduit between those two worlds. So I don't know. I want to raise that as an extra support as you go forward, and I'll be here to do what I can.
I wholeheartedly will second that. I shared it. Yeah, yes. City council meeting that, you know, I met Troy. He was my SRO. I'm going to date us both here, but my SRO, right when you joined, you know, years ago, and it's and you're still here, and it's, as an adult, I relate to you now, and as a kid, I never would have interacted, hopefully not, with an officer. It was a great interaction. So I think, Bartlett, to your point, it's huge. So if there's other channels or avenues, I know we've talked about this a little bit, Troy, but if there's anything else we can be doing, public comment didn't go well for me, but we'll find other channels.
Well, thank you. And at a time when the community and a lot of people are asking for us to do more community policing, I guess it's frustrating that we're seeing one of our the one program in our department that does the most community policing being under a lot of scrutiny right now and possibly being eliminated is very frustrating, because again, I don't think people understand the relationships that we build at that school. Yeah, if it comes to that point, I will definitely be asking for some support and help from this committee. And I think we're kind of at a standstill, just waiting for that comprehensive review to be completed.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of projection with what's going on a national level and how people relate to police, to what we do here. And in reflection of that, I do wonder, you know, as this committee, you know, if we had some more of those minority voices present, if we would be hearing a little bit more of that influx, and would there be as much of a disconnect, or would we still, you know, based on what we know and what you guys do, would we be in the same position? So that's one of the things that I've been wondering, and just have we been not hearing some voices that we need to hear in some of these discussions. I think the program is a really good program, and I really do see the value of it. I just want to make sure we're all listening to the voices that are out there, even though it's, you know, a lot of national climate is being projected. So.
Great point, Jeff. And I don't know if you see, there's been a push by the city. They want to diversify a lot of the city committees. They're doing a lot of advertising. They're trying to get some pamphlets out, and they're really that's one of their big goals is to diversify the city committees for the exact same reasons you just mentioned. So good point.
All right. Any other comments here? Thank you for going through training for 8 hours and then being here tonight. We really appreciate it. Wrap up here quickly so you can get some rest. Well, not you, Scott, but future agenda items. I have the Scram draft, both policy and design. Is there anything else we want to add to future agenda?
Like working on diversifying the committee. I think since that seems to be an overall city objective, I think we can see what kind of voices we can add here, because I think that would really improve the quality of discussion that we have and broaden the channels that we have available to us. I'm going to date myself and say my SRO officer when I was in Middleton was Steve Britt. So that's so.
Yeah,
He was
Jeff,
fresh
was
faced
laying it all
and
out.
pretty young.
All right.
So Rebecca, just Jeff, let me clarify. Do you want that as a future agenda, or do you want to just kind of keep that on something that we talk? You do want it?
I think that's something that we need to discuss, because I do worry that we are limiting what the information that's coming in, and even if we don't mean to. I mean, I really just want to make sure we're getting as broad of a view of what is going on in the world of policing as we can.
And do you want that on the next agenda, or do you want to kind of see how the city progresses with their initiative to the outreach that they're doing? So I think they're doing like a Zoom meeting at the end of February.
I want to be proactive about it, since I want to have it on our own agenda. So when we go to like the big city meetings, hey, we can say we've been doing our own efforts to really try and broaden that, because we agree that's an issue and we're trying to address that.
Okay.
So that strengthens your hand in some of those discussions, I think, too.
Okay, sounds good. I'll add it to the agenda for future meetings.
Great. Well, if there's no other additions, look for a motion to adjourn.
Anyone at all?
So move.
Okay, motion to adjourn.
Great.
Is somebody going to second that motion, or are we just going to sit here?
I'll second it.
Anyone? Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Chief, for your time, and all you lieutenants. Thank you for being here. Appreciate all your service and staying up till 8:30.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, everybody. Take care. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care, guys.
Bye.